Great. So welcome, everyone. It's good to see that we have people still trickling in. The main goal of today is really just to both introduce the new resource that we've been working on for just over a year now, I would say, in terms of the initial planning, but also to open up the floor for some feedback if there are any kind of experiences with the resource already for those of you who have tested it out. And just to flag that, this is an ongoing project that we hope to improve over the next little while as we move towards having this as one of the most comprehensive sources for synthesized research evidence in a number of domains outside of health that are increasingly becoming important considerations for those looking to strengthen health systems as well as social systems. So we want to acknowledge that the funding for the development of social systems evidence is provided by McMaster University through the Faculty of Health Sciences, the LaBarge Optimal Aging Initiative, the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging, and the Provost Strategic Alignment Fund. So all of these groups help to contribute to the development of this resource. And I wanted to provide some background. And I lead with this because we at the forum tend to focus ourselves, coming from the health world, increasingly moving outside of health, but we orient ourselves around the new Cochrane KT framework, which we think actually is not just useful in health and health systems, but also social systems. Many of you on the webinar will be familiar with this concept of facilitating pull, and it's one of the key 6 themes in the new Cochrane KT framework. As part of this facilitating pull, one-stop shops of pre-appraised synthesized research are one of many types of mechanisms that can help to facilitate pull. They also enable other efforts to facilitate pull, such as rapid response services, as well as other types of themes such as packaging and push, supporting implementation and supporting the exchange of ideas and research evidence through interaction. So we tend to view one-stop shops as the platform from which you can do many other types of activities that support the use of research evidence and policymaking. We've found that since developing health systems evidence, these types of resources are essential. Specifically, the forum uses health systems evidence in a number of different ways to support all of our programs. Without it, we wouldn't be able to rapidly look for research evidence and synthesize it to address pressing health system issues. And as a result, we now see the usefulness of a similar resource that addresses social system issues. It's not just us that uses the health systems evidence. It's also an important piece of work for a number of others outside of the McMaster Health Forum, including researchers, and they use health systems evidence for conducting overviews of systematic reviews, to analyze the types of review methods being used to answer specific types of questions, and increasingly to prepare evidence maps to provide you with insights about where the best evidence lies and where there are gaps, for example. We're increasingly also seeing that policymakers are using the resource to do things like write rapid syntheses and briefing notes internally and to inform their policy analysis. So we see about a quarter, if not more, of the registered users on health systems evidence actually self-identifying not as researchers or managers or health professionals, but as policymakers. So it's great to see that the resource is being used by a number of people outside of just the research community. Through Forum Plus, and I think Steve may have alluded to this, we're starting to build on our expertise in advancing human and societal health and well-being, and specifically the Forum's experience in using the best available evidence and systematically elicited citizen values and stakeholder insights to strengthen health systems, to focus on strengthening social systems as well. So we tend to refer to getting the right program, services, and drugs for those who need them in health systems, and we're increasingly trying to find ways through utilizing the best available evidence to get the right programs, services, and products to people who need them through the social systems lens. So in order to support the work in moving into social systems, we realize that we require a comprehensive, continuously updated repository of pre-appraised synthesized research evidence about the programs, services, and products available in a broad range of government sectors and program areas that also covers the governance, financial, and delivery arrangements within which these programs and services are provided. So we know from experience at the forum with our health programming that if we were going to move and do similar things to support decision makers in the social systems world, we'd likely need a similar resource. So I start with that as background, and I'm going to jump into the top 10 insights, which directly relate to some of this background. The first big insight and kind of lesson that I've learned over the last year in helping support this work is that it's really important to clarify what is needed. So we could not identify a single source or a one-stop shop in the broad social system space when we were seeking to develop citizen-targeted content about the social aspects of aging. So about a year and a half, or maybe it was more ago now, as part of our work to support the content development of the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal, the idea came up that it would also be important because citizens are really interested in understanding not just the health side of things about aging, but also the social aspects. When we went out to look for if there were single stops we could look to find pre-appraised synthesized evidence, there weren't any. We acknowledge that there are some efforts to develop and keep high quality syntheses in a single online space. So the Cochrane Library is a great example. There are many What Work centers in the UK, and there's also the 3IE group that houses syntheses and often high quality syntheses about social program service, but all of these aren't contained in one space. So you'd have to know to go to each of these sources individually if you're going to do a comprehensive job of getting the best available research evidence. And it's a challenge for a lot of folks, not just us if we're working on tight timelines, but as mentioned earlier, those folks working in government specifically. So given the fact that there is no comprehensive source of all syntheses that are pre-appraised and indexed in ways that are easy to access, our conclusion was that we need to build something similar to health systems evidence in the social systems space. The second big piece of this was, if we're going to do this, we need to learn from existing approaches that we know have worked from our own experience. So Steve mentioned earlier, and I gave you some background, that we have years of experience, nearly a decade in developing and maintaining a one-stop shop in the health systems space. So that's health systems evidence. In doing this over the last 10 years, we've defined methods, and now it's working quite smoothly in terms of how we harvest content. So we do weekly searches of PubMed and Medline using predetermined search strategies, monthly searches of the Cochrane Library. We have a very clear process for conducting eligibility assessments. So for example, if their documents are relevant to health systems and if they align with particular inclusion criteria for document types, all of that is very well laid out in our process. We have a very clear approach to categorizing eligible documents. So in health systems, we look to the health systems arrangements as well as cross-cutting themes. And then we have a very specific approach to curating all of the documents that go in and add value to them. So for each document, we do a quality appraisal and we provide many different types of links to user-friendly summaries, scientific abstracts, etc. So we've also established a team and processes for executing all of these methods. And we've developed custom online admin and user interfaces, for example, the search engine, that we've found to be very useful in doing this. So we decided to build on all of this experience, learn from what we know, and then jump into the social systems evidence project. So we had to develop a plan because we knew that we couldn't use the same sources for harvesting, of course. The same search terms would not work, of course. We're going to look in different places for different types of research evidence that don't just focus on health, of course. They focus on the social programs and services we're interested in. So we decided that after much deliberation of all of the different bibliographic databases that ProQuest, EBSCOhost, and Web of Science, which include many of the most important indexed libraries online, they capture most of them. So we decided to go with those. We also looked into JSTOR and IPSA as other potentially feasible sources. However, in actually trying to execute weekly searches for reviews and economic evaluations in these databases, it became increasingly clear that it wasn't as seamless to harvest from those sources. So those two are particular, I don't want to say thorns in my side, but I can't think of another way to describe it right now. We're trying to figure out ways to effectively harvest from those sources as well. But for now, we've clearly defined our methods in terms of searching ProQuest, EBSCOhost, and Web of Science each week. So we started with our ideal search strategy for systematic reviews, economic evaluations, and other types of syntheses. And we had to iteratively revise all of our search strings to make sure that what we were doing within each database was working. So as many of you will likely know, that running research in ProQuest is quite different from EBSCOhost. There are a number of filters you can use, et cetera, et cetera. So we had to iteratively revise our approaches in each of those databases. We also identified more than, I believe, 50 different websites and sources that are potentially housing syntheses of social systems issues. And we've decided that we're going to do manual hand searches of 26 of these websites that host reviews relevant to social systems. And we prioritized in the first round of trying to get the beta version up and running monthly searches of high yield resources. So by early 2018, we should have every Campbell library review in the database. We should have every 3IE review in the database, every review from the What Works centers in the database, and every review from the Epicenter in the database. So we have a number of other sources in addition to these 26, which we'll be doing quarterly searches for. So the way that we developed our approaches to manual hand searches was really just how easy is it to search the sources and how easy is it for us to pull things in for eligibility assessment. All of our eligibility assessment is done by 2 independent raters. So this was our plan going in, and many of the details were worked out as we were piloting and testing our approach. But the important thing is that we had to develop a plan. So the independent assessment by 2 raters is based on relevance to program and service areas. So I'll get to that in a second when I outline our taxonomy, but there are 16 program and service areas that our assessors will look at, and the first question is, are the reviews that are identified relevant to any of these program or service areas? The second question is, if it gets past the first, are they relevant to governance, financial, and delivery arrangements in social systems or implementation strategies to support change in social systems? And do they align with any of the document types we're looking to include in the database? So that would include the full range of systematic reviews, as well as evidence briefs, which draw on many reviews to address problems, options for addressing them, implementation strategies, overviews of reviews, protocols, registered titles, as well as economic evaluation. So they have to be relevant to one of those document types. So after going through harvesting from all of the electronic sources I mentioned, doing hand searches, which we're still doing actively, we currently have more than 125,000 potentially relevant documents that we have harvested. So we also had to cut off how far back we were going. So we often think that the most recent reviews are more helpful, particularly in the last 5 years, because things can go out of date relatively quickly if new single studies are being published. So we decided to cut it off at 2010 for now, but we currently have 125,000 that we need to go through. This is growing every week. We're getting many, many more hits each week from our electronic sources. So this number will continue to grow, and our team is doing their best to work through this, assess for eligibility, and include in the database. So the beta site we launched last week, and there were over 300 pre-appraised reviews included. But as I just mentioned, we're trying to work through the backlog. The goal is to, by the end of this year, have all the 2017 stuff done, and then we'll actively push next year in 2018 to have it up to date for both 2017, 2018, and everything back up to 2010. And the content will be added on a continual basis. So we're going to just do additions in bulk as we work through the backlog. So our plan for indexing content, we had a lot of back and forth about this, and our first way in was to devise a taxonomy that was relevant and understandable to policymakers working in government, as well as other social system stakeholders and researchers. So we actually conducted close to 20, I believe it was 19 key informant interviews with international experts from across a range of social policy domains. And we sat with them on the phone for about an hour. We put a draft of the taxonomy and literally just groupings of categories in front of them and asked them to weigh in about the wording as well as some of the subcategories we've included. And we've landed on 16 different social program and service areas that we now have as filters in the database. So everything from citizenship, children, youth services, culture and gender, education, all the way to housing, recreation, and transportation. So there's 16 different program and service areas that are used to index and that can be used as filters in the document. We also, much like health systems evidence, tend to think of the world in terms of policy levers. So we also cross-cut these categories with document relevance to governance, financial, and delivery arrangements in social systems. So how are we governing the system? what types of funding and remuneration approaches are we using to pay organizations or fund organizations and pay different social system service providers, and how are we organizing the delivery of different programs and services and social systems. We also cross-cut each included document by those 3 domains as well. And when relevant, whether or not there are insights about implementation approaches, we'll cross-cut with those as well. Given the recent emphasis on thinking through how intersectoral action can be used to approach the Sustainable Development Goals, we've also included the Sustainable Development Goals as cross-cutting filters. So our content captures all of them except for some of Goal 3, so the health part of Goal 3, which is relatively well addressed by health systems evidence, Goal 7, and none of Goals 13 to 15, which are focused on climate and the environment. And the reason for the last 3 was more about the link to direct social programs and services isn't as direct in those types of domains as they are to the others. So we're, of course, open to suggestions about how we might expand into these areas. So let us know if you think there are real ways and if the research does lend itself in this way to thinking through those 3 goals in terms of program and services that directly affect citizens. I've already mentioned the document types we include, but we also include those as ways to index the documents and provide users with filters. The 5th big insight is really you need to find ways to add value to the content. It's not good enough just to have an index of all the sources that's searchable. It's also good to help people use the information in a more rapid way. So we searched high and low for different quality appraisal methods and tools that we could use. We tended to find that in the health system space, AmStar, the tool for determining methodological quality, was helpful. We've decided for the current time being to stick with that tool for social systems evidence as well. Again, we're open to different suggestions for tools to appraise the quality of systematic review methodology. If there are more appropriate ones in the social systems space, please let us know. It'd be very helpful to know that. If we need to change direction, now's the time to do it. We also include links to all of the single studies included in each of the reviews that are contained in social systems evidence. And so for each review, we not only provide the links to the studies, but we index them by country. So if you find a review that's particularly relevant to a topic you're working on, and you also want to know not just what the global evidence that's synthesized says, but also if any single studies were conducted in your own jurisdiction, you can quickly link out to that single study as well. We provide links to user-friendly summaries of reviews when available, and we also provide links to scientific abstracts. And all of this is meant to push users. We don't index the documents directly on the site. We actually drive traffic to the original sources of the review. So if it's a Campbell review, if anyone wants information about that review, they'll be redirected to the Campbell site. And same goes for What Works, 3IE, Epicenter, et cetera, et cetera. So any source that we harvest from, we point users back to the original source. The database really is just a way to index and help people find things much easier. So I've made the point that it's important to make it easier for people to find what they need. So our user interface was developed with a number of key supports to make it easy to access relevant evidence. So there's the open Google-style search field for anyone doing quick inquiries that really doesn't depend on specific filters, document types, et cetera, just based on topics and keywords. But the advanced search engine is really what helps people get to what they need to very quickly. So I've already mentioned what those filters are. There's also a guided search to support those who might be new at using the resource to find the filters that are most applicable to them. And like any resource of this nature, it's important to realize that over time we do see, specifically with health systems evidence, that the more people use the filters, the more they become comfortable with using them and the quicker they can access the evidence that they need in the time available. So we also realized in developing health systems evidence that it's important to find ways to prompt users with new content. It isn't the case that everyone is going to be the keen researcher that goes back to the resource every time they need to find evidence. Sometimes we need to push that evidence out to them, and we want to make sure that any new evidence that's published in a domain of interest for users are prompted in their inboxes as frequently as they want it. So we will have a save and subscribe to preferred search. So people using the resource and who find that a search that they run frequently is something that always yields good results for them, but they don't want to come back to the resource frequently. They just want to get the new stuff in their inbox. they can save the search and also subscribe to its Get Monthly emails. So those monthly emails will be coming soon, and we'll also be suggesting searches for particular priority topics as well as time goes on, so that people can subscribe to those as well. We've also realized over time that it's not just the policymakers and stakeholders and researchers that want the evidence, it's also citizens that are interested in a number of topics that are relevant to them. So we're currently supporting efforts to develop resources to help interested citizens that want to know more about how to age optimally to find and use research evidence. And this is mostly about the social aspects of aging, so one particular example of how this can be done. So we've developed, using the content that we've harvested for social systems evidence, to develop citizen-friendly products for the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal. So now the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal, by the end of 2017, will have 26 evidence summaries, 12 blog posts which draw on many evidence summaries, and more than 200 ratings of website resources that can help citizens find products that are meant for them, that highlight exactly the types of information they'll be looking for when looking at research evidence. So much different than the types of approaches we use to support policymakers and stakeholders. We also have a Twitter service that now draws on social content, which basically looks at all the headlines coming out in the news and weighs in with what the evidence says about those headlines. So as part of this, we realized that our more elaborate taxonomy, which is hosted on social systems evidence, isn't going to cut it for citizens. So we developed a citizen-friendly browse topics taxonomy that draws on that original taxonomy of program and service areas I already mentioned, and helps citizens find what they need quickly in more lay language. There's also in this resource a federated search for professionals, which allows people searching the citizen-friendly site to get insights about aging from social systems evidence. So one particular example in one domain, aging, of us trying to support the use of social evidence for citizens as well, but this could be applied in a number of different domains. A really, really important piece that we've over time realized that it's just essential that the approach you use has to be systematic and transparent. I've already mentioned that we have explicit methods that we've used to build, and really our adaptation for SSE, or social systems evidence, we've done this for a number of reasons. So we will publish it just like we have for health systems evidence. We'll talk about the independent raters. We'll talk about all the processes which we've documented as well. The reason this is so important is because we want to open up a dialogue about the most effective ways to do this. So we think we're the only group now in the world trying to do this, and we want to have conversations with others who are interested in this domain and thinking of ways to do similar work to make our process better. So part of that is just being systematic, transparent, and documenting everything you do, just like good researchers should. So just like health systems evidence, we are now opening up a conversation about our processes, our approach to harvesting, et cetera, et cetera. Doing something that seemed like an impossible task at the beginning. Now it's clear that what we are doing is quite possible with the resources if you have them available. But again, it's really an open conversation about making our approach better so that the entire community of folks who are interested in using the type of evidence that is contained in social systems evidence can contribute to making it the best resource possible. And finally, and I can't stress this enough, is we have here at McMaster University the ability to draw on extremely dedicated researchers that enable us to build sustainable processes. So our current staff in developing the resource at any given time would include anywhere from 8 to 10 undergraduate research assistants. So these students usually come from the social sciences and sometimes the health sciences. We, at any given time, will have 4 to 6 graduate students who are undertaking some of the more analytically demanding tasks, such as doing eligibility assessments and coding, although we have had lots of back and forth with the right balance between mentorship from graduate students and allowing research assistants from undergraduate programs to also contribute to that process. So we're constantly learning about the right balance there. And there are 2 to 3 senior form members on the team that oversee this process at any given point in time. And it's really important that these senior members have both experience in managing projects of this nature, so you need to think about it through a process and operations perspective as well as from the scientific perspective. So we've been able to draw on the expertise in both of those areas from the members that we have engaged on the project as well that make it work. So it's really important that you have the right mix of folks on the team and that they're engaged and dedicated, and we're just so lucky and blessed at McMaster to have this available to us. We rely heavily on peer mentorship to transfer knowledge of processes. So we generally hire new research assistants in waves. The new ones come in knowing that we might have 5 or 6 of our current staff leaving in 6 months. We try and overlap as much as possible so the more senior students can mentor those younger students. And then, of course, the senior scientific staff are really there to weigh in on any key issues that are coming up and to help drive some of the methods forward in new ways, if appropriate. There's a constant dialogue about process improvement. So we have an open door and open email account policy where anyone on the team that finds anything wrong, either from a technical lens, so if the admin interface online isn't working properly, all the way to more kind of methods-oriented questions about how we're applying the quality appraisal tool. That type of conversation is constantly had among the team members, and this is something we learned very early on in developing health systems evidence, and we transferred this into our approach to social systems evidence as well. So in terms of my big thoughts and reflection on all of these lessons and just where we're at after about a year of trying to get this project off the ground, and now we're in a beta version, is that you know, we really have a number of strengths we need to acknowledge with the resource. So we're increasingly getting to the point where we can get users what they need quickly and comprehensively without having to do searches of separate sites. We're driving traffic to the producers of these synthesis sites, so it's a win-win for everyone. And it also importantly enables us to pursue a number of strategies to support policymakers and stakeholders with evidence, values, and insights. So for example, we are now increasingly in a position where we could do rapid syntheses for folks sitting in ministries of transportation, for example, or education, whereas before it would have just been a Herculean task to do that. Some of the weaknesses, of course, I need to acknowledge that there's lots of content, as I showed earlier, nearly 130,000 documents that need to be assessed for eligibility. So I said that we're hoping to move from a trickle to a roar this month, and by early 2018 and by the end of 2018 to get through that entire backlog. But of course, this takes time and people to get this done, and so we're still trying to balance that in among all the other demands that we have in terms of programming of the online interface, et cetera, et cetera. So eventually it will be the most comprehensive source, and we're actively trying to get us to the point where we're in a steady state and pushing that forward. So I've mentioned a few times that we're really open to feedback. So we've done a number of expert interviews to get the taxonomy into a certain place. And we think that we're doing a comprehensive approach to our searches and harvesting, but we're always open to suggestions. So if anything I've said today, if you have any reactions, then please email us directly at sse@mcmaster.ca. We're more than happy to field those questions and to consider ways to improve the resource. So I'll open it up to questions, but I'd like to just do a quick run through to highlight some of the key features before I do that. It will only take about 5 or 10 minutes or so. I would encourage everyone to actually go to the resource and to see it. So it's www.socialsystemsevidence.org and to use it and apply the filters, et cetera. But I'll quickly go through now. I hope everyone can see it. Please let Stephen know if they can't. And Steve, I can't see the chat box, so if you hear of anything, just speak up and let me know.
Yep, so when you go everything's working fine.
Okay, great. So when you go to socialsystemsevidence.org, this is the page you'll see. I'm not logged in yet. As mentioned earlier, there's an open search, which really is just that Google-style search field. We have a number of opportunities in the future to improve how the keywords are triggering different types of content using a program that allows us to weight different pieces of the keyword strategy that's entered. So we're going to increasingly improve that. But for now, generally a powerful approach to just getting topic-specific resources. The really important thing on this page is that users coming at the resource here blank can do a number of things that can support them to use it more efficiently and effectively. So one is just the language. So we currently have English and French. We're hoping to move into Portuguese, Spanish, and potentially others in the near future if we can secure some resources to do that. But for right now, everything on the site is available in either French or English. So you can change the entire interface just by choosing a different language. Another piece for people to be aware of is if they're not comfortable going to the advanced search right away and just want some prompts about how they might be able to utilize the filters to get to what they need a little bit quicker, there's a feature called the guided search, which I'm pointing to here. I have it turned on. You can also turn it off, and then it goes away if you find it annoying and you know how to use the database and don't want the prompts about the filters. But for those who are not as familiar, a number of prompts. So it asks you, do you want to know about particular government sectors and program areas? And all of the 16 I mentioned are listed here. And the same goes for the different types of filters I mentioned. So when you click on any of these, it will open up the advanced search bar. And for citizenship, for example, we'll open up all the subcategories of citizenship. So you can quickly go and click off any of the filters you might find relevant to your search. So that's the landing page. Another piece that I wanted to show folks, if you're comfortable doing it, I think there's a lot of benefit. It's free to register for an account. It's really quick. You can just enter your email password, confirm your password, make the bot happy by clicking on the I'm not a robot section. And once you're logged in, which I'll log in with my account, a number of things happen on the advanced search page. So I'll get to those in a second. I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the right of the screen where the full list of filters that I mentioned in the presentation are available. So here's our taxonomy of program and service areas. And so if you see a little arrow here, it means that it's expandable. So everything from citizenship all the way to government services housing. So when you expand that category, you can see that there are subcategories within all of them. You can drill down to what you'd like. For system arrangements, we've adapted our governance, financial, and delivery arrangements taxonomy that we use for health systems evidence. So if anyone's familiar with that resource, this should be pretty easy. For those who aren't, there's a number of different governance, a number of different financial, and a number of different delivery arrangements that can be clicked off as filters as well. So worth considering whether or not you're interested in any particular pieces there. Implementation strategies, these are really those targeted at citizens, providers, and organizations to try and make sure that any effective option that's chosen can be supported and implemented in a seamless way. And these are to overcome specific implementation barriers. So there's a number of resources that are included under these categories as well. And as I mentioned already, all of the sustainable development goals that are covered in the database can be used as filters as well. So these are linked to the other categories in ways that make sense. So you're generally going to get broader searches using these filters based on how they align with the program and service area. There's a number of cross-cutting filter domains, so specific populations of interest. You can also filter by those if they're relevant. Specific outcomes of interest, you can focus on those. And academic disciplines. So if you're interested in research from specific academic disciplines, you can also filter your searches by that. I mentioned that we index all of the reviews in terms of the single studies included in the reviews as well. And so you can filter by country relevance to the documents, whether it's a target of the documents, which isn't always the case in systematic reviews, of course, but if there's at least one study from a country you're interested in, you can also filter by that. There's a number of different country groupings depending on the lens that you're looking at the evidence base from. And if you're only interested in studies relevant to low middle income countries, you can also search using those filters as well. A number of document features. The most important one here, I think, is the type, which can directly link to different types of questions. So if you're interested in the effectiveness of programs and services, you go to systematic reviews of effects. If you're interested in a number of other types of questions, there's systematic reviews addressing other questions, economic evaluations. When you decide to click on any type of filter or type in any type of keyword, when you're logged in, you'll notice that there are a couple of options to make your life a bit easier. One of them is saving your search, and the other is save and subscribe. So save search works now in the beta version. Increasingly, we're moving towards the subscribe, which I'll get to in a second. But the save search essentially allows you to add to your profile your favorite searches, which are linkable, and you can basically go to your profile, click on it, and it will rerun the exact same search. Eventually, we're going to get to the point where you can click save and subscribe, and each month you'll get all of the new content added to the database that runs the same search in the subset of new content that we've added that month. Another piece I want to flag for folks is the ability to select an email to yourself when you're logged in, to save particular documents to your dashboard that are particularly relevant, and to view all of those that you've saved. So this is a running list essentially of all the documents you've ever found. And I can show you that I've saved here. It will show up in my saved documents profile. So you'll have that running list. Anytime you click on a one-page summary, you'll get all of the links that are available, the abstract, the domains that are tagged, and the filters that have been applied. And when, again, we're adding content on an ongoing basis, you, for every review, will be able to get links to the included single studies as well. So those are the main pieces that I wanted to show people in demoing the database. Again, we're in beta version. We plan on expanding the content as rapidly as we can, given the team and resources we have available now. Open to feedback, open to the conversation and other questions. So I'll now hand it back to Steve, and we can address any questions people have.
Great, thanks, Kaelan. As I mentioned in the chat box, if you have any questions or comments on social systems evidence at this point, questions about Kaelan's insights, questions about how social systems evidence works, please feel free to share them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to address them. I hope that everybody enjoyed the walkthrough and that it gave everybody a bit better of a sense of some of the key features of social systems evidence, as well as how it can be used. So Kaelan, we have a question here of whether we've considered using specific taxonomies from other fields, such as the ERIC, E-R-I-C taxonomy from education.
So the ERIC taxonomy was one that we looked at, absolutely, and I think that what happened was we used it as a starting point for fleshing out our subcategories within education. We also spoke to a number of people across different ministries of education to try and get to the point where we were using the most universally applicable language. So one of the challenges we had is that we found that some people, in terms of taxonomies, were mixing things like outcomes with populations, and what we tried to do to the best of our ability was keep focused. When we have a filter category of program and service areas, each of the subcategories had to be a type of program or service domain. If it wasn't captured there and it was relevant to an educational outcome that was important, we would try and look at our outcomes taxonomy and subcategories there and add it in. So it was an iterative process. We absolutely looked at it, and we consulted with a number of education experts to try and get us in the right lane. But again, we're open to different approaches and different suggestions. If you look at any of the taxonomies and think anything is missing, then please email us at sse@mcmaster.ca and let us know.
Great, thanks. And we had another comment and question. So it says that the aspects of capacity to critically appraise is the discerning factor for making this different from a knowledge hub that includes everything and anything even remotely related to the topic in question. Do you use sector experts to do this at master's PhD level, and those that you have to do this? So I guess does that make sense in terms of how we appraise the evidence, I guess?
So we don't do we do an appraisal of the methodological and reporting quality of each of the reviews. So we don't go into the strength of the evidence or the how high quality and how robust the point estimates, for example, in a meta-analysis might be in a single review. We will look at the big picture questions of, from a review method standpoint, did they do a good job in making sure that they had a protocol published, that they had at least 2 people doing eligibility assessment for inclusion in the review? So those types of questions are more general to the process of developing and producing a good systematic review that we've used here. So we don't necessarily need content experts to do that assessment of the methods. You know, that's more something that a methods expert could do. We train staff here with mentorship of both graduate students and then highly skilled and more senior undergraduates who have been along and done quality appraisal for quite some time to do this for us. The tool is actually quite simple as well. So we have a tool that is a number of checkboxes that people need to look for, but that by no means suggests that there is a content assessment of each review in terms of how robust the findings are. So it's more about the methodological and reporting quality rather than anything that a content expert would need to look at. I hope that answers the question.
Well, that's great. If anybody else has any other questions, please feel free to use the chat box and ask them now. I would also just like to take this opportunity to point out that we have these webinars, these top 10 webinars every month. We have another one scheduled for early in January. I just encourage you to check out our website through the link that is listed there to check out all of our range of topics of upcoming webinars, as well as recordings from past webinars as well. We cover a fairly wide range of topics, issues, and different experiences from groups around the world. So I don't see any other questions at this point, Kaelan. So is there anything else you'd like to add in, or any other information to bring up?
No, I think we've covered it all. And, you know, I guess just bear with us as we're in beta mode, trying to make the resource better and trying to make it as comprehensive as possible. Know that we have harvested a lot and we're just trying to work through the backlog. So sooner than later, the resource will be a very comprehensive source of pre-appraised synthesized evidence related to social systems.
Great. Thanks. So I guess I would encourage everybody to take the time to visit socialsystemsevidence.org after today's webinar, and we certainly hope that you'll find it useful. Feel free to email us at sse@McMaster, like Kaelan mentioned, if you have any comments or questions or just want more information about it. And we hope that you'll help share the news about this resource within your networks and with your colleagues as well.